Hello and welcome to this Motor Trade Radio Trade Value Special with Brego, powered by Cazoo, hosted by Philip Noffard and Curtis Hutchinson.
Thank you for joining us on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. Today, we've got our regular monthly episode looking at the performance of used car trade values. And once again, we're joined by a friend of the pod, Rupert Pontin, Head of Insight and Communication at Brego, who will take us through the key trends that impacted trade values over the course of August. So welcome back to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, Rupert. We're looking forward to hearing how August panned out and how trade values are looking as we go into the all-important September plate change. So how's the number crunching been going this month?
Hi, Curtis. It's good to be back. Thank you. Number crunching has been pretty intense, I've got to say. There's been quite a lot to go through and to pull out the right trends and see what's been going on in the marketplace as a whole. I think probably I'm just going to do a couple of moments on what's been happening from a sales perspective. And just to be clear, the data that I've worked on has been between the 1st of the month and the 24th of the month. Okay, so I always need a couple of days just to make sure that I've got everything in there. But if we look at sales for the month through that period, we're looking at a period where we've seen sales increase over the previous month by just shy of 0.4%. So it's nice to see a little bit of an upward movement there, and that's positive overall. But there are some interesting nuances in there. We've seen quite an increase in the number of pre-registered sales. They're up by 17.7%. And we've also seen quite a bit of activity at the 4-year-old end of the market, where we've seen a drop in sales of about 5.3%. So when you look at it overall and start breaking it down by years, there's some really interesting nuggets of information that come out from that.
And I mean, Rupert, you say that you're looking at that sort of up to the 24th, and how would you describe the used car sales market at the minute, and those headline trade figures in August, how they compare to this time last month and obviously this time last year?
Well, I think this month has been a little bit more difficult for the dealers. There are people back on the forecourts and there are inquiries coming through, but generally speaking, they're having to work a little bit harder to close the customers. The customers are very cost conscious at the moment. They're looking at getting the best value they can for money. So it's quite a challenge for them overall, I think. But at least they still have people coming through the door, which was not quite the same as it was the previous month, which was very much a month of two halves. And I think that was interrupted by sport, and I think it was interrupted by the good weather. So now it's stabilised out a bit. That's more positive, and it's nice to see that slight increase in sales.
And those trade figures, what are they in terms of performance of trade values? Those number of sales, etc. How are they comparing month on month, year on year at the minute?
Well, let's move across then to what's been happening with the trade values as opposed to sales. And we've actually seen a similar, i.e. 0.4% change in the trade price overall. So it's an increase we've seen over the previous month of 0.4%. And again, the detail is always the important part. And I was fascinated to see that actually the trade values for 2-year-old vehicles increased more than anything else. And there was a 2.6% increase in 2-year-old trade values, which I was kind of expecting to see at around the 3-year mark, because we do see quite a lot of activity in that part of the marketplace. There's a lot of 3-year-old cars being defleeted and coming into the used market. So a little bit of a surprise to see that. On the negative side, it was 9-year-old vehicles that saw the biggest drop in values, and that was a 6.3% drop in the trade value. But and I think that equates to around £490 or so. So quite a big change there, which was a surprise. But we have seen that trade values towards the older end of the market have been a little bit unstable over the past couple of months. So we've got a mix there. At 9 years, we've seen a drop of 6.3%, but at older than 10-year-old vehicles, we've seen trade values come up by 1.1%. So really interesting to be able to go through the data in more detail and see what's happening.
And Rupert, we'll look at fuel trends in a moment, but before we do, can you take us through some of the trade value trends you've tracked over the course of the month by age and market sector?
Sure. So when we're looking at market sector, this was interesting. So I've just focused on the top 10 sectors. Okay. And when you just look at the top 10 sectors, actually, the average trade price has increased by 1.7%. So quite a bit above the market average as a whole. So obviously, the smaller sectors have been the ones that have seen a bit of a decline in pricing. The biggest movement came up for trade values for the prestige medium sector. So that'll be sort of Audi A4, that type of vehicle. And we saw an increase of 1.5% there, which that also, in terms of volume, I think the volume change was an increase of 3%, just shy of 3% in the volume of vehicles in that market sector. So that was interesting in itself. The one that declined particularly was the lower medium sector, where we saw a drop in trade prices of just about 1%. It's been quite fascinating. I mean, when we looked in terms of the age, I think we covered that off a little bit earlier. But the key age activity for me that I find fascinating at the moment is for the 3-year-old vehicles and the pre-reg market. Both of those are very lively at the moment. The pre-reg market, that's coming off the back of H1, which ended, and there were a lot of cars pre-registered at that point, and the volume of adverts climbed significantly. And then there's this 3-year sweet spot, I think, where we're looking at a lot of interest around electric vehicles, which we'll see when we talk about the best sellers.
Obviously, Rupert, I mean, fuel types is obviously always the main topic of discussion. And I mean, what trends have you been seeing by fuel, especially obviously those EVs and the plug-in hybrid market?
Yeah, so this is really interesting for me because we do have a lot of discussion around what's going on with the ZEV mandate and so forth. Electric vehicle volumes increased by, this is for adverts, obviously, by 5.9%. So very clear indication that there are more of them coming back into the marketplace. When you compare that perhaps with the petrol, where you see 1.6%. And then it starts to get really quite interesting because you start to get to the smaller fuel types, propulsion types. There was actually a drop of 0.9% in terms of adverts for hybrid vehicles. Plug-in hybrids went up by 6%. And then there's some really big changes in volume terms. The plug-in hybrid diesel, it's a small part of the market, I grant you, but there was an increase of 13.2%. Whereas for plug-in hybrid petrols, it was a drop of 4.3%. And that actually, with the plug-in hybrids, less of those around. And actually, there was a drop in average price of 4.4%. That's trade price. So perhaps that is signifying that there is quite a bit of demand there, and it's for the more expensive vehicles. So you see those more expensive vehicles coming out of the adverts, and then thus we see that drop of 4.3%.
Well, we'll be back after this short break with more from Brego's Trade Values and Rupert after this break.
You're listening to a Motor Trade Radio Trade Value Special with Brego, powered by Cazoo.
Welcome back. Now, Rupert, you track the Chinese OEMs very closely. We know from the latest SMMT figures that they are pretty much driving new car sales growth in the year to date. But what trends stood out for you in August amongst some of the newer Chinese brands finding their feet in the used car market?
Yeah, Curtis, you're absolutely right. There's an enormous amount of interest in Chinese cars at the moment, and we see a plethora of new brands coming into the market. And of course, the way in which those vehicles are delivered as new often impacts what happens with the new market, because we've got the arrival of those vehicles at staggered intervals coming to the marketplace. But you're right, the new car registrations have gone up. When we look at what's been going on in terms of the activity specifically for the month of August, is, well, I've got a bit of July data here as well, but if we look at the total number of listings during that period, they have increased by 6.9%, okay, month on month. So we've seen total Chinese market, and I'm excluding here the sort of legacy Chinese-owned brands such as Volvo, such as Smart, and Lotus, and so forth. So really, particularly sort of BYD, JQ, Cherry, that type of thing. And in terms of sales, just a slight increase of 0.3%. But the devil is always in the detail, and it's interesting looking at which manufacturers did better than others. So if you look at BYD, month-on-month used car sales increased by 0.6%. But if you look at JQ, they've had a really big push recently, and there's an increase of 19.8%. So that's a significant upward jump. Likewise with Leapmotor, they showed a 47% increase. Obviously, Leapmotor have got far fewer cars in the market, but if you look through the media, you can see some really cracking deals, leasing deals on those. And I know that if you're working through looking for a new car through CarWow and so forth, you can get some really good discounts on those as they push those in towards the marketplace. It's a very, very exciting place at the moment.
No, I was just going to add, it is a very dynamic marketplace, isn't it, at the moment, with these Chinese brands coming in some volume now. Is there anything that really stands out for you in terms of the performance of the Chinese brands?
Yeah, I think for me, what we're seeing is that we're beginning to start to see the influx of the Chinese used cars coming onto the marketplace. We know with the new cars, some of them have done some rental deals, and we'll see them shortly. But it's watching the volume of adverts increase over the next 6 months or so. So when we're talking about what's happened in terms of used car adverts, we're looking at a month in August so far where the Chinese vehicles take 0.9% or 0.95%, sorry, of the share of adverts in the marketplace. Now, if we wind that back to August 2025, it was 0.25%. So you can see over the course of the year, we've seen quite a change in that. Now, that's going to accelerate, as I said, when more start to defleet and come off the short-term PCPs that they were maybe put on to start with, the sort of 2 year or so. And that I find very interesting to watch. In terms of sales, we're looking at a ratio of, again, very close to 0.9% in relation to the volume of total volume of sales, used car sales in the market as a whole. And the average price has changed quite significantly as well. So that's sitting at 25,689 in August this year, but was 21,788 last year. And I think that's because we've seen more of an explosion of the sort of mid-range SUVs, large SUVs that are coming over, that have been sold, and they are being sold, and those are obviously higher in price. So I think that's what's affected it there. But yeah, it's a really, really constantly moving marketplace, and it's going to get more exciting as we see, as I say, more cars come back.
And I mean, you mentioned there that retail advert volumes. How is that been looking for August? I mean, what's the age profile looking like? What's the actual month-on-month volumes, etc., looking like in the marketplace?
So if we're looking at whole market advert volumes, the change that we have seen month on month from July to August has been 1.54%. So just a slight increase. And that is kind of expected at this time of year. There are more cars sitting in the wholesale environment, but the dealers and the sales rate, yes, we've seen that upturn in sales, but there's always a slight imbalance during August in terms of supply and demand as people sort of take last minute summer holidays and so forth. But advert volumes by age are quite interesting. And we see the change, and I'm looking now just for a second at year-to-date volumes, where we've seen that the biggest change has been a drop of 23% in the number of 6-year-old cars available for sale over the course of the between January and August this year. And I find that astonishing, and I think that is a clear indication of well, there is demand obviously for that age vehicle, but remember we're going back to vehicles that were registered at the pandemic time, I think there are just less of them in the marketplace. But the growth in terms of advert volumes over the course of the year has been in the older cars. So 8-year-old vehicles up 9%, 9-year-old vehicles up 7%, 20-year-old vehicles up 12%, older than 10 years 18%. So more of those cars available. But generally speaking, I think advert volumes are in a good place in relation to demand.
And Rupert, your analysis also covers the month's fastest selling used cars. Who were August's winners? Who are amongst this month's winners?
Okay, so fastest sellers for the whole market in August 2026 were the MG HS 1.5T. And that was at 8.4 days to sale. Okay, so I'm looking at vehicles here where we've had a minimum of 50 sales, so you take the real outliers out of it. So the MG was in first place. The Cherry Tiggo 8 was in second place at 10 days to sale, and that was followed by Leapmotor and another MG in fourth place, and finally the Renault Arcana in fifth place. Now, that's quite a different picture from what we saw last year, where it was the Audi e-tron 55 Quattro Technic that sat at the fastest seller. There were no Chinese vehicles in that top five as we have this year. So it was an Audi, it was a Vauxhall. There was an MG, sorry, but that's a more established Chinese brand, and then a Mini and a BMW. So quite a change when you look at it year on year.
And I think for me, obviously, there's a lot going on. I think for me, finding that what's happening with those Chinese manufacturers as we continue to sort of monitor what that starts to look like. And I know it's something that you're closely monitoring, Rupert, around, as we start to see those early returns from those first entrants into the new car market. I think clearly, we touched on it last month, but obviously trying to monitor how they stand up as a used proposition in the market. And I know you're aware, but obviously some of the lead times are increasing, aren't they, for some of the new entrant manufacturer now, particularly on certain makes and models that you've got quite long lead times, haven't they?
Yeah, they have got long lead times. I think there's been a great deal of demand for the JQ7, and lead times on those have accelerated. There's been more demand overall. So if you're looking to get specific colors or specific specs, certain models are now sort of 3-4 months away, and it's very difficult for the dealers to be able to predict when those cars are actually going to arrive. And I was just looking briefly there, just out of the corner of my eye, at the fastest sellers on EVs. And this time last year we were seeing a more traditional legacy set of brands in the top five. So the Audi, Kia Niro, Tesla Model Y. But for August 2026, the top two fastest selling EVs are Leapmotor. Now, Leapmotor weren't even here this time last year. Sitting at Leapmotor B10 at 9.2 days and an average price of 28,500. The C10 in second place, 11.3 days to sale, 31,998 average price. There's been quite a change in what we're seeing, and that's a good thing to see, because it shows the market is evolving, but maybe slightly scary for those legacy brands.
Yeah. There's a lot going on, and just to say thank you for coming on today. And again, as always, for anybody that hasn't been listening to our monthly trade value update with yourself, Rupert, how can those listeners get in touch with you? How can they sort of do a bit more of a deep dive into some of the data and analysis that you're continually looking at the minute, and how do they get involved with Brego?
Well, the best way is just to reach out to me, either on LinkedIn or via my telephone number, which is shown on LinkedIn, and I can put you in touch with the commercial team that will show you the platform, show people the Brego platform, which has some really good features which will allow people to do a deep dive. One in particular is our Brego Insight tool, and that effectively is the tool I use to prepare all the data when we talk. It enables people to question our data set, query our data set, and ask any question that they wish about what's going on in the used car marketplace. But the platform itself, very structured, very easy to use, and the best way to get a grip on how that works, you can have a free demo, you can have it on trial. It's as simple as that.
Well, Rupert, many thanks once again for joining us for this month's roundup of the trade values. We do appreciate the time you spend with us, so many thanks for joining us. We'll catch up again this time next month to see how September performed. Many thanks for listening. We hope you found this trade values insight useful. Philip and I are back with all the big car retailing headlines this weekend. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to this Motor Trade Radio Trade Value Special with Brego, powered by Cazoo.